I'm Cyrus, and I work at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. I'm a computer scientist, and my job is to develop and to heavily use the visualization tool VisIt. So that's what I'm here to teach you about today. Joe gave us really a lot of the foundational visualization concepts. So I get to dive right in and just talk about VisIt, so give you some more of the practical, pragmatic stuff. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a little bit of project background on VisIt. 5 minutes is what I said. That's a little ambitious. If you see the slides, don't panic. There's a million of them. Those are there for your reference. I'm only going to cover a few of them here. But there's some good nuggets in there on data file formats and those type of issues, which are always come up, and it's good to have some place to go to look at them first. So after I tell you a little bit about the VisIt project, I'm going to give you a tour of VisIt. So just take you around the GUI, show you some of the plots, some of the operations, and then after that, we're going to try to do a hands-on in 30 minutes, so a very short hands-on. So follow along if you'd like to. If you haven't downloaded VisIt yet, now would be a good time to swamp the network and do it. So if you want to search for VisIt, this is a test of kind of knowing how much Google knows about you, right? If you want to search for VisIt, you Google VisIt, you're likely to get, VisIt Chicago or something, since it's location-based. Me, when I do it, unfortunately, it comes up with, VisIt visualization software, because Google knows a lot about me. But the key is that you should Google for LLNL VisIt. That's Lawrence Livermore National Lab VisIt, and that gives Google enough context to say, hey, this person's looking for a scientific visualization tool. There's also visitusers.org, which is our kind of community website for a lot of resources on VisIt. And you'll notice the tutorials that I'm going to go to are going to be based on there. So the stuff I cover, all that's kind of outlined, at least for the hands-on aneurysm, it's all outlined there as well. So that can help you follow along. And again, this is just for, in the slides, this gives you a whole bunch more reference material, a whole bunch of links to eventually get to the right place. But if you go to visitusers.org and you search for tutorial, you're pretty much guaranteed to make it to the correct place. Before we start, I wanted to acknowledge the data that we're using. So this data is we're going to use an aneurysm simulation, which a lot of people are obviously doing these days. We've seen examples of them, I think 3 examples of them just today. And in this particular instance, we're using some data from colleagues at Swiss National Supercomputing Center. And this is, again, blood flow through an artery, basically, where there's an aneurysm. That's what we're going to be looking at. And the particular simulation that we're using, we're only using a subset of it, but it was simulated using a solver called LifeV, which is a finite element solver. So just get that out of the way. And yeah, I mean, the aneurysm simulation is very interesting, although when I hear people describe it, it's kind of morbid, right? So it's a really cool thing to look at, and it's a really important medical application of CFD, but I still kind of get the chills when I look at some of these images. Notice that when I've seen it in other people's presentations more than mine. I just hadn't thought about it as much. Okay, so a little bit about VisIt. So I've already alluded to the fact that VisIt's not a great name. It's an amalgam of visualize and it. And of course, that's not very good from a marketing perspective, because you can't Google it. Of course, VisIt was established in the early 2000s when we weren't thinking about those type of things as much. What is it? Well, it's an open source tool that allows you to visualize very big, primarily mesh-based scientific visualizations, or scientific simulations. Works on your laptop, works on big supercomputers. So all the algorithms that we have in there are meant to scale up in an MPI sense. It's released under open source BSD style license. And I want to emphasize it's not something that's just dusted off to do the biggest runs in the universe and to make the best pictures of those. It's used daily by application scientists and domain scientists at the national labs, at DoD, et cetera. So it's a robust tool that's used by people in their daily work. And how do we do distributed memory parallel visualization? Well, this kind of gives you a cartoon, right? So this is a big data set of a fluid mix simulation that was actually done in 2006. So at the time, that was a giant simulation, but now it's kind of, we're seeing lots of simulations of this scale, and we have resources to deal with these. There's heavy fluid on the top, lighter fluid on the bottom. And you're seeing a PseudoColor Plot, which is kind of a plot that gives you a idea of the range of scalar values in a field over there the density. So you're seeing where the mixing is occurring. So that full picture there is, and this again alludes to Joe's content of saying how do we do big data visualization, how do we distribute little chunks. The full data set, that's what you want to see, but how we're dealing with it is what you see here on the right. So we have a whole bunch of subgrids, we deal with ghost cells, all those things in order to create the right type of picture. VisIt and ParaView, they're both MPI tools, and VisIt and ParaView are also moving towards taking advantage of threading. And that would be domain level threading, so threading on each of these boxes, but then also GPUs and OpenMP and that stuff's all coming around the corner. All right, so where did VisIt come from? So I'm from Lawrence Livermore National Lab, that's where VisIt was born. So it was created in the early 2000s to support Livermore's large-scale advanced scientific computing physics codes. So at the time, there weren't tools that could handle the scale of the simulation, so you had to build a visualization tool that could also scale out, and that's how VisIt was born. Around 2006, 2007, we started looking at different funding sources, and we started being involved in more of the DOE community and DoD community, and we moved the project to open source. So 2008, we have an open source repo now, and since that's opened up a lot of collaborations. So currently, there's VisIt developers at Lawrence Livermore Lab, Lawrence Berkeley Lab, University of Oregon, Utah. There's commercial companies who have interest in VisIt. Intelligent Light's one of them. They're based out of New Jersey. They do CFD post-processing. And also TechX Corporation uses VisIt heavily in their products. So open source tool, a lot of work's gone into it, and it's grown into kind of a robust tool. And how do we do it? Okay, well, we have a client-server architecture, which is really important. You saw the people talking about the debuggers in the morning, how they said, well, we're trying to avoid this X11 problem where you have to run your GUI over X and it's slow. Both VisIt and ParaView and those type of tools, we've had to do this from the beginning because graphics is particularly painful, especially 3D graphics over X11. So we solved this by breaking the tool into a bunch of different pieces. So the viewer is kind of what coordinates it all, and you'll see that on the left. And then there's a whole bunch of different clients. So GUIs, Python clients, et cetera. So that's how you drive the tool. And then on the back end, we use a parallel engine, which uses MPI. And that's what reads all your data and does all your crunching and slicing and all those things, and delivers the view of the data back to the viewer. So in order to do this scalably, you have to be able to do parallel compositing. Joe covered this as well, but it's kind of an important concept. If you try to send a whole bunch of data back to your laptop and you try to render it on your graphics card, at some point that's just going to break. So you have to turn and use the supercomputing resource into a parallel renderer and a parallel compositor. And once you do that, then you can you can render the biggest images. So quick example here of some things that I've been working on. This is more analysis type stuff with VisIt. So this first example is looking at analyzing turbulent mix. So and in particular looking at vorticity and how vorticity evolves and basically dissipates in a simulation. And one of the things you want to be able to do, so in visualization, it's pretty easy to do something on every little point, or pretty easy to ask a question about the whole mesh and do a sum and get a value back, like what's my total mass. Some of the harder things to do are identify substructures in your mesh, because although you can generate the topology, you have to kind of put it together. You have to be able to figure out how you can identify these individual things. So for this effort, we wanted to find these little worms, and we wanted to identify all those little worms and get statistics about them and look at how that evolved over time. So in order to do that, we have an algorithm implemented that allows us to kind of label these things. This kind of clown-esque picture on the right here shows that we're individually labeling these little worms. And once we're able to do that, then we can post-process them and do a whole bunch of interesting things. So in this algorithm, it's particularly complicated to implement in parallel, but we've done it and it works. So that's one example of analysis that we've done with VisIt. Another example is also a turbulent mix example. So at Livermore, we have several hydrodynamics codes. They all write to VisIt, and they all have different physics options. And what we like to do is say, okay, well, we have all our codes and they all share the same post processor, so we want to build a toolkit of kind of turbulence analysis operators. And this is kind of done using our Python interface. So with this, we can do things like, okay, let's look at a RANS model and let's compare that to a DNS model. So if you're familiar with DNS, you know it's very expensive, and RANS is supposed to estimate that. So you should be able to fact check yourself using these operators and things. And some of those operators involve basically taking a fluctuation across one dimension of a mesh. So you have to first identify the mean and then subtract off the full field and do things like that. So we're able to use VisIt, and build these building blocks and give them the scientists for them to do their work and do their analysis. VisIt's a tool, but we also like to talk about it as a platform. So Joe mentioned earlier that these tools are extensible, VisIt and ParaView. Both of them have a wealth of ways that you can add new features into them. Writing your own database plugins, writing your own plots, your brand new plot if you want to plot things different. So plugin architecture has been in there since the beginning. We also really heavily rely on Python. So Python's an important piece of what we do, and we also have an in situ library called libsim that allows you to couple VisIt directly in your simulation code. So VisIt's also used to deploy visualization research, so that's another good thing. There's this productization that has to happen for research to get in the hands of domain scientists, and VisIt's one avenue for that. So we're involved with a lot of efforts, and I'll skip on that for now, but a lot of research efforts in the DOE and also some more smaller efforts with people like TAC and a bunch of other folks. So in summary, what's the deal with VisIt? So again, it's built to work on small data to big data, and we give you different pieces of the puzzle in order to put together your visualizations. So there's also features in there that are for different types of people. Visualization experts or domain scientists, they want to do different things. Or code developers who are developing a simulation code, they might want to use VisIt to debug their simulation because it gives them a different context than a regular debugger. All right, so here's some more resources. Again, this is in the PDF, so it's there for your reference. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the tour of VisIt now. All right, so when you start VisIt, this is what you see. So over here on the left, this is what we call the GUI, so this allows you to drive things. And here on the right is the viewer, so that's where your visualization windows appear. There's kind of 5 concepts you need to think about in VisIt. The first is a database, so that's how you get your data in. The second is a plot, so that's how you view your data. The third is an operator, which allows you to slice and dice your data, so data transformations. The fourth is an expression. So what an expression is it's a mechanism that allows you to define new fields on the fly from existing fields in your simulation data. So say you have mass, you can calculate the volume at each cell, you can multiply those two together, or sorry, not mass. Say you have density and you have volume in your field, you can multiply those two together, get your mass. That's kind of the basic thing. And that's used also, a lot of codes don't dump out vorticity, for example. So we have the velocity field, well, we take curls and those type of things in order to generate the vorticity field on the fly. Final one is queries. So that's the 5th one. And queries just allow you to ask questions about your data. How big is my data set? What's the average value? Things like that. So first, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to open an example data file. So again, we're going to be using what we call a database here. So for this tutorial part, I'm not expecting you to follow along. When we get to the hands-on, I'll slow down a little bit. But you're going to have a whole bunch of different example data files available to you. In this example, I will click on something called example.silo, which is one of our favorite example files, as you might imagine. So I browsed in my operating system and file system, and I got this file, and I opened it. Now, the next thing most people do when they're dealing with VisIt is they say, OK, what happened? I must have done something wrong. There's no picture on the screen. Well, that's kind of by design. If you're doing things that could be heavy lifting, we want you to explicitly tell us what you want to do. So the first thing you need to do is you need to actually create a plot. So here is what we call the plot list. After I've opened the file, you can see it available here. And I'm going to go, and these are all the different types of plots that we have available in VisIt. And they're kind of grouped by the different types of data you have in your data set. So in this example, I'm going to create a pseudo-color plot of the pressure field. And I get this green plot up here, which tells me, hey, it's ready to be drawn. Again, I haven't drawn it yet because I haven't told VisIt I want to draw it yet. But if I click draw, I'll see my picture, right? So now you can rotate around. And PseudoColor is one of the most widely used plots, probably the most widely used plot, obviously. in VisIt and visualization in general, I'm going to pick a really bad color table, right? So I'm just changing the color table here a little bit so you can see. So PseudoColor just gives me the scalar field mapped. And there's also other types of plots. So if I want to look at the mesh topology, I can add a mesh plot to that. So now I have these side by side. So plots, that's the first thing. How do I see my data? Next thing I talked about were operators. So what am I going to do here? So say I want to look at a slice through the data. So in the operators menu here, I have a bunch of different categories of things I can do again. I'm going to look under slicing, and I'm going to add a slice. And this is going to give me, a 2D slice of my data. Now on the plot list here, you can kind of see the visualization pipelines that are going on. If I click on this PseudoColor here, I get the options and the attributes of the plot itself. And if I click on the slice here, I can do things like tell you where you want to take that slice, right? And there's also something that allows me to unproject it. So by default, we turn it into a 2D plot. But if I wanted to keep it in 3D, there's an option to do that as well. So I'm going to put that back real quick because I want to show you a couple of interaction things. So in the viewer, we have options. Obviously, you see me navigating around, zooming, all those things. There's a magnifying glass that allows us to zoom in closely. A reset button that gets us back. Panic button, we're back. And we also have these pick modes that allow us to kind of interrogate, pick a place and interrogate on it. So if I click here on this little plus Z, and I click on my data set, I'll get a window that tells me more information than I could care to know about that point. Now, if you're a simulation code developer and you know that the mesh is tangling there, then there's never enough information in that window. So that's why that window is very, very comprehensive, right? So other things we have are lineouts. So this is the lineout mode right here. And if I click here and drag without my mouse, I can get another curve that samples the data at those points. So basic interaction stuff. All right, so slice allows you to do a geometric thing. You're saying, hey, I want this plane, but it's also very useful to, do you have a question?
Yeah. So what's the underlying function representation? Is it like piecewise constant?
Yes, so it's piecewise constant, so linear on the nodes, bilinear on the nodes, trilinear on the nodes, and constant within a cell.
So how do you do, if you take a curl or whatever, how does it?
So we have a lot of different gradient operators. So some of these things are very heuristic, right? We're also working on putting in higher order element support for using kind of a finite element toolkit that'll give us better capabilities for that. So in some cases we've implemented the gradient operator of a specific code in VisIt, so we get the same answer as them.
So the rendering right now is just piecewise constant or linear?
In this case, it's linear because I'm plotting a value that's on the edges of but it would be constant if it was otherwise. Let me get this off for now. So again, we did a slice, so a slice allowed us to do a geometric thing. A very common thing you want to do though is look at your data based on the scalar field representation. So instead, I'm going to do isosurface. So an isosurface allows you to set specific values. So values in my field, so we saw those blotches, right? I can pick out specific blotches and extract surfaces from them there. You can get a picture that looks like this, right? Let me get this here. So, and again, still follows the same modality where you click on the operator and you have a whole bunch of knobs that you can turn in order to get into your data. So another representation that we talked about and that Joe showed earlier was a volume plot. So do a quick volume plot real quick here. Again, this is kind of casting array through your data set and using it almost like an X-ray, but you have a fancy color attached to it. You can use it to do an X-ray as well too. Just gonna set up something really quickly here. And again, so this is how I can set my transfer function. Let me just click this and draw. And so it'll take a second here, because it's actually doing software compositing right now. So here's my histogram of my data. I can pick out different parts that I care about and emphasize those in one way or the other, or completely cull them off if I wanted to. So you can see the different spheres and stuff there. All right, so that's a volume plot. Another plot is a filled boundary plot. So what this does is it actually does material interface reconstruction. So we have a way of getting volume fractions for mixed materials into VisIt. And there's a bunch of different options for that. But you're seeing this, you see this picture here and you say, well, that's not very interesting, right? There's only one material. Well, it turns out we have another material hidden inside of this one. So this Venn diagram here acts as our subsetting mechanism. We pop that up. There's a bunch of different ways that you can access subsets of your data. This particular data set has 2 materials in it, so they're called MAT1, but that really should, that could be any name, but it's representative material. So if I turn off the air, which is all you're seeing, it's including what's inside, this will do an interface reconstruction and give me this chrome, which it's just a nominal name for the material inside of it. So, so there's a bunch of different ways to do material interface reconstruction. The default way works pretty well for visualizations. It doesn't preserve volume. There's ways to preserve volume and all these things. So it depends on if you're doing analysis or just making visualizations. All right, let me go ahead. I'm going to turn this back on. Just show you again. So there's other operators for slicing and dicing. There's a 3-slice operator. There's also spherical slice, which answers the question someone else had earlier. But 3-slice allows me to set 3 planes and keep those in 3D. And you can see here I am actually slicing this reconstructed volume. If you looked in here, you'll see these all started as little cubes, right? And now they're smooth surfaces due to the material interface reconstruction. We've looked at a lot of plots. We looked at a lot of operators. I also mentioned expressions and queries. I'm going to go over those very quickly. So when we talk about expressions, we have data in our file, but we want to do some computation on that to produce a new data field. So let me get my example data set back up here. All right. So under the controls menu, there's this expressions window, and this is where your playground for doing these derived quantities are. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a gradient of a temperature field, and I'm going to call it grad temp. And the output's actually going to be a vector, so I'll select that. And then this is where VisIt's expression language is exposed. So basically, there's helpers to help you understand what all these things are. But these are little building blocks that are kind of applied in generally per cell or per zone of your mesh per node. So if I wanted to find a gradient, I can say, okay, I'd like to do a gradient of, and then I'm going to look at temperature, which is one of the variables in my mesh. Define that and say, well, that's fine. So we'll look at that with glyphs in a little bit, but I can also look at the magnitude. So I can take the magnitude of this new guy that I just created. Watch me not type. Okay, so I define that, and that's actually a scalar mesh variable, because again, the magnitude is going to be a scalar. And I can go back here, and once I do that, you'll notice that the new variable I have appears as something that I can plot, just like it came out of the database. Difference is that when you plot this, VisIt's going to construct it on the fly. So when I draw this guy, I'm going to get the magnitude of the vector field, and I can also use a vector plot, which Joe talked about using glyphs to label things, and I have this here too, grad temp. So let me create this vector plot. So by default, VisIt doesn't want to show you a whole bunch of glyphs, because glyphs are kind of a memory resource intensive thing. So, but for this small data set, we can up the settings here to show things a little bit better. Let me magnify this real quick. All right, so you can see here's the vector field that was created kind of on the fly with that. Yes?
So as you already printed on with glyphs, that's pretty memory intensive, it's kind of a pain. There's not really any good solution besides BTK Python for rendering, let's say, millions of glyphs.
Oh, well, you can do it in VisIt. I mean,
so that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, you certainly can. It's just going to be painful no matter. I mean, so right here, I don't want to put up one of these, because think about it. You're generating little tubes and little arrows and sending that all to a graphics card or rendering it. So you can still do it. It's not a problem. And if you're running in parallel, it'll be easier. But yeah, we try not to let you shoot yourself in the foot. We try to have the options be dialed back a little bit and have you opt into some of these things that could be expensive.
Also, do you, I see you have your own internal scripting language of sorts. Do you offer the capability to do like geometry on points?
So the expression language is kind of a strange beast. It's not really a scripting language. It's kind of like a domain-specific language. We use Python for scripting. I'll go over that. And then we also have a way in Python for you to be able to do things on a finer granularity. So, yep. So, okay. All right. So almost done with the Whirlwind tour, and then we'll slow down a little bit and look at the aneurysm data set. So the last building block I talked about was queries. So again, control menus query brings up this list of different things I can ask my data set. So this just applies to the plot you have active. So I have the vector plot active right now. Bunch of different things in here, from asking where max values are to doing very specific things like shape characterization, all kinds of stuff. So I'm just going to ask where the max is. So we have a maximum query, and I click query, and I'm going to get back this text here that says, hey, oh, I guess I clicked on the min instead of the max. The minimum value is here, or is this, and it exists at this point in your mesh. So that's one of these things you can do a data summarization option. There's also things like give me the total volume of the mesh and stuff like that, so you can ask those questions. Okay, so 5 things: databases, plots, operators, expressions, queries. You guys are all good to go now, right? So other really important things. You can save what you've done into a session file in VisIt. So under the File menu, there's this option, Save Session, or Save Session As. And basically it pops up and it says, I'd like to put everything that I have set up, all the windows and all that stuff, put it in this file, and I'm going to come back later and pick that up. And that's good for a certain type of workflow. So, yeah.
Does that include all the custom fields and stuff you added?
Yeah, it does include all the expressions and all those things. Correct. Yeah. Another really important thing is our Python scripting interface. So we really heavily leverage this. So it's pretty comprehensive. You can do anything in Python that you can do in the GUI. The good news is that we've connected the two. So you can go in, and there's this menu, or this window under controls called Command, which allows me to essentially record whatever I'm doing in the GUI and turn it into Python that I can run later. So for example here, I have this plot already set up. Well, let's take it away. I'm just going to show you what we can do. I click record here. It's going to pop up a command line interface. I can just hide those for now. And I'm going to go in. I'm going to create a plot. And this guy. And let's add Isosurface Operator to that, and I hit draw. But I don't like that Isosurface setting, so let me just say I only want 5 of those. Right. If I come back to this window and I hit stop, I'm going to get something that allows me to recreate the exact same plots in Python. So this is a really powerful tool for learning the Python interface. When you're doing big, complicated visualizations, you really want them to be reproducible. So you want to go to Python as quickly as possible for doing things you're going to be working on, especially over months or something like that. You want it to be reproducible. Yes.
So if I want to do batch processing, Python is the scripting language to use when the batch processing?
Correct. Yeah. So and it's kind of hard to see here, but. Yeah, well, I'm going to pull up some Python scripts real quick, just to show you, to give you context too. So I have some here. So we're just going to look at 2 really simple examples. So, yeah, I mean, this is what we go to for movie making. If we're doing anything complicated, fly-throughs, all that stuff, we go straight to Python usually. So this gives you an idea here of what our Python interface looks like. Again, it's like you're driving the GUI, right? So what do? Okay, well, I'd like to add a plot. I'd like to set some attributes. In this case, we have a little loop here that loops over a range of ISO contour values. So it allows me to do a whole bunch of slices. So I'm going to go ahead, and I have this set up to run right now in my commands window, and happens to be here. I'm just going to show you this example. So if I execute it, it's going to go and walk through a whole bunch of things. And if you look at this thing here, for movie making, you want to save the image. Well, there's a save window, which allows you to do that. So that's kind of the basics, the 0th order thing you do. This is another quick example. So this one actually, it's 30 lines of Python, but it actually shows using all 5 building blocks. We open a data set, we do plots, we do operators, do some queries, throw some expressions in there. So this is a great example because it kind of shows you how you interact with all those modalities. I'm going to go ahead and run that real quick, and it's going to put up a couple plots for us. Where's my window? OK. So here's the plots that it created. So it created some streamlined plots, some slicing. It did a gradient. So that's a good example to look at there. And you should be able to find that on the VisIt users wiki. If you have any problems finding it, let me know. So to pause here, that's what we want to do for the tour. So very quickly, maybe just 1 minute or so of questions if anyone has anything.
Yeah. So importing VisIt as a library and just running directly from Python is my preferred modality. Is that routinely used, or do you try to keep it all internal through your GUI?
So you can import VisIt into Python. There's some caveats with binary Python modules and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a VisIt module. You can import VisIt. You can launch it. You can launch it in batch and do all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So and then I didn't cover it, but what you're seeing here is driving the GUI. There's also a special mechanism that allows you to write expressions in Python, get every cell and all that stuff. So there's a lot of flexibility in Python. All right. Anyone else? One more.
Quick question about that last thing. Documentation for all of those things that be found on the VisIt website?
So there's lots of VisIt websites. That's the first thing you'll find. But yeah, poke around. So there are manuals. I mean, there's a several hundred-page manual of the Python interface. My recommendation is if you want to learn how to do something in Python, you're going to want to do what I showed you: drive and then record. That's the easiest. That's what I do all the time, and I've been working on the tool for years, right? So
are there any important limitations that we should be aware of?
As far as, well, there's always ways to take you off a cliff, right? I mean, you saw me doing volume plots. Volume plots are very resource intensive. If you try to render things out at double HD resolution, you're going to need a lot of memory and stuff like that. But again, these things are built for you to run on parallel resources and get access to that. So yes, I mean there are definitely pitfalls. Just like in scientific visualization, just like there are in HPC everywhere, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and try to slow down. We'll see, and look at an aneurysm data set. So if you want to follow along, feel free to follow along. If not, this is the exercises are pretty well documented, so it's something you can do later in the hands-on. There's also so I'm going to be here on visitusers.org, search for tutorial, come here. There's a couple sections here, and this is basically what I'm going to be following. Also for the hands-on, there's another data set. If you don't want to think about aneurysms all day, you can look at water flow. So this is a dam break simulation, right? Another happy thing. So there's a bunch of materials here for you to follow along. Some interesting stuff. But this is what I'm going to be following here is this blood flow simulation. Blood flow simulation hands-on. We've already seen that works. That's good. And again, I'm going to open my database here, which in this example is a file that groups a whole bunch of different simulation time steps together. So I have it sitting here, aneurysm tutorial data, and that file is called aneurysm.visit. All right, so first thing, let's take a look at our mesh. So let me do a mesh plot of mesh and draw that. And so here you can see, the topology of our computational mesh. And, if you were to guess, what would you think these elements are? What are these guys? Tets, correct. Fantastic. So they look like triangles, but they're tets. They're finite element mesh, 3D. So with VisIt's query interface, we can ask questions. So I can ask number of zones. So different scientific domains have different ways of talking about elements or cells or zones. Those things are overloaded as are vertices, points, and nodes. So the hydrodynamics community kind of uses nodes and zones, so that's kind of penetrated into our,
Right.
yeah.
You just launched into a website that you said was available for us also to look at.
Yes.
Where?
VisitUsers.org.
Okay. So this isn't one of the things that was linked on the agenda page, or?
No, it's in my slides though. Yes. So there are some setup instructions on the agenda page too, but yeah. All right. So we can ask questions about the mesh. So how many tets are there? Turns out, this isn't that big. There's 130,000 tets. I can ask how many vertices there are. It's a lot less of those because all of them are shared on the nodes. So just kind of basic getting to know your simulation output. If I open this guy here and I double click on the mesh attributes, I get the options for drawing the mesh. So I can do things like change the color of the outline. Can actually look inside of it too. There's a way to do that. So if I turn this off, I can see straight through it. So, and if I click on show internal zones, I can see even more things. There's a lot of them, right? So everything I do in this window, I kind of have to hit apply here to commit it to the plot. Again, I want to explicitly tell you what to do because it could be expensive. So not surprisingly, we have a lot of tets. So when we plot them all, that's not the best way to look at it. But it's important. You can slice it. You can look at individual zones and individual elements. So the mesh is fine and dandy. We actually have a lot of different time steps in this simulation. But the mesh is the same on all of them. So this time slider here allows me to probe different points in time, but that's kind of not such an exciting thing to do with just the mesh. So let's look at one of the scalar fields that lives on this mesh. Let me turn this back. So I'm going back to sort of the default settings of the mesh plot here. And I'm going to add a PseudoColor plot. PseudoColor, so we have two fields in this data set. Now, this data set was kind of compressed down, subselected from a bigger data set in order to be 300 megabytes so you could play with it. There's two fields in it. The first is the pressure field, and the second is a velocity vector field. And VisIt, so I talked about how you can do expressions and create derived quantities. For vector fields, VisIt automatically will give you a magnitude for free if it exists in your thing. So you'll notice the things I can plot here are pressure, and then there's also velocity magnitude. We'll look at pressure first. So I click on pressure. Now I have the PseudoColor plot. I'm just going to keep the default settings for now. There's some info on the wiki how to make it a little bit nicer looking, but I'll skip that. And I'm going to take this guy off. So let's just look at this individually. So here's my pressure field, and if I push play, you'll see it animate over time. Right now, it's really just looking at the color bar is kind of instantaneous at every time step, so that it can jump all around. It's really hard to see, but this is going, the max value is going from something from like 300 all the way up to 10,000. So better thing to do is to set the limits explicitly ourselves, so we have some maximum, so we have context that makes sense throughout the whole thing. So I'm just going to set that to 500. Play it again here. So obviously something's going on here. We got some blood flowing through here. And I think, one of the questions you might ask immediately of this is, okay, well, is there some way to extract the heartbeat signal out of this simulation? We're simulating a beating heart, and that's what we all think about, right? So we can do that using the query interface. And VisIt provides a query that allows you to go on all your time steps and get like the max value or the min value, and that's what we're going to use. So before we do that, we need to tell VisIt, hey, I want you to use the time as my x-axis whenever I do this extraction. So we go to the controls menu, and we go to query over time options. And here this pops up. This just gives us a couple different knobs that we can turn. And I'm going to set it to time and hit apply. Now, if you don't do this and you hit the query over time thing, you're going to get, so this data set, all the files say cycle 0. Cycle's the default thing. So you're going to get a vertical line because all your x's are going to be on top of each other. So if you see a vertical line, if you try this, that's what happened. But I'm telling it I want to use time, which is also in the file. You can see here This is the time in seconds of the simulation. So once I've done that, I dismiss that window, and I can go back under the controls window to our query interface, which I just showed you. And I'm going to select the max query. And then there's options here, additional options here, and I'm going to tell it that I'd like you to do it over all of time. Here you can override the time steps and things like that. We have 200 time steps. We're just going to say go for it, do all of them. And I click the query button. So it's reading all the files now. You can see it feverishly reading them all. And then we get this signal out. So that's the maximum pressure in the data set over time. So how many heartbeats do we have? 2. Yep. So the actual simulation is much longer. This, I think, well, much longer. I think it's maybe 10 times longer. So I think there's 20 or so heartbeats to go through it. But this subset here is 2. And then if you want to think about it a little bit more, well, you have time on the x-axis here, so you could say seconds, and then you could go to beats per minute. Yes?
So you said you can plot like the maximum over the field, but can you do more like fine-grained things? Like can you take an isosurface and then plot the maximum over an isosurface?
Yes. Yes. So our query interface kind of operates on the output of whatever your operators and all those things are. So if you did something like take a sub-volume out and ask the volume question, then you'd get that new volume. And there are some caveats. Some people like to have the shortcut of comparing what the original data was and the actual data. So what it is pristine from how I read it from the file versus what I've done to it. So some options have these swizzles here to tell you, oh, I really want you to do it with with my output. So see that on some of those. Yeah.
Can you create particle streams given the velocity field?
Yes. So we'll go over that if we don't run out of time. But we'll definitely go over it later. So okay, so we poked around. We looked at the scalar field pressure. Let's just real quickly look at the velocity magnitude. So again, this has a velocity field. Now it's all blue because I have limits that don't make any sense. Remember, I set those limits for pressure. I wanted to clamp it. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off. Now, okay, I realize I'm going a little too fast here. So you can change the variable used on an existing plot by using this variables button here. So we were using pressure. I'm going to switch to velocity magnitude. And let me go ahead and take this maximum value off. So you can see here, we're looking at the exterior of the mesh, and you don't want the velocity to really be greater than, you want it to be 0 on the exterior of the mesh, or else things are leaving, right? We expect that to happen in a couple places, the inflow and the outflow of the artery. But what we're really seeing here is not much structure. So we're plotting this field, and we know things are going on inside. Well, how do we get inside of there? So we're going to use isosurfaces and isovolumes to do that. But first, I think the better thing to do is, once we start plotting these surfaces on the interior, we're going to kind of lose some of the context of the mesh. So we want to just have the mesh there as transparent so we can orient ourselves as to what these new fields are. So I'm going to go ahead and add a simple plot. It's called a subset plot of our mesh. And I'm going to set an option real quick that allows me to make it opaque. So I'm just going to color it. You could do this with the mesh plot too. There's many, like many tools, there's many different ways to do the same thing. But what I'm doing here is I'm basically, subset plot will color things by some category. Here we're just plotting the whole mesh. I want to set the color to a light blue color, and then I'm going to go ahead and just turn this opacity way down. And hit apply, dismiss it, and click draw. And then here we are, we have kind of some context here for the exterior of the mesh. All right, so back to the velocity. So we want to look at places where we know there's some interesting stuff happening inside, so we want to look at high velocity surfaces. So I can add a pseudo-color plot of our velocity magnitude again. And in this case, I'm going to add an isosurface operator. So again, isosurface is a way to say, hey, at these values, pull out the surfaces that fit that scalar field. So that's under operators slicing and isosurface. And we'll go ahead and double click on this. instead of just having it set a couple values, I'm going to go ahead, or a couple levels. So right, by default, it just says do 10 levels throughout the whole data set. I'm going to set explicit values. So I'm going to do it at magnitude 10, 15, and 20. Hit apply. Get rid of this window and draw. OK, so now we can see these contours. And we can watch them as the simulation evolves. We can watch where the high velocity is coming in. So when the heart beats, things flow in more, et cetera. I mean, this all matches your intuition. So Isosurface is great. It extracts a surface. For analysis, a lot of times you want to extract volumes, though. So we have ISOvolume. So instead of doing a surface at one value, it gives you a volume in between two ISO values. So I'm going to go ahead and add that instead. So here we are, velocity magnitude. I'm going to take off my Isosurface operator. And I'm going to instead replace that with an ISOvolume operator. So under the operators, there's selection. Oops, under operators, there's a selection menu. And the names try to make sense. I mean, slicing, selection, but like anything, you just have to get used to where things live. So ISOvolume, and I'm going to open this. And instead of setting 3 particular values, I'm going to tell it a minimum value and a maximum value, 20, and use that. And when I do that, you'll notice, I'm actually getting volumes out. In the plot, if you looked at it before, you'd have little concentric surfaces, surfaces. But I actually get the volumes out. So I could do something like query the volume and get the volume at high velocity, right? So that's all fine and dandy. We can look at these things. But when you're dealing with vector fields, it's better to look at, kind of the vectors themselves directly. So let's go ahead and do that now. Oops, I wanted to keep that. Let me get my plot here for reference again. Quickly. And if you're looking at the wiki, there's another section here. This visualizing the vector fields is a second section that's on there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create a vector plot of our velocity vector field directly. So again, add plot, and then under vector, you'll see I have velocity as an option because that lives in the file. And I'm going to set some options. So again, we run into this issue where VisIt doesn't want to draw a lot of vector or a lot of glyphs to begin with, but we're going to tell it, please go ahead and do so. I'm going to set a stride of 10, which means show me every 10th value. And under the glyph section, I'm gonna scale this up to make it a little bit bigger. So this is when we draw the vectors that are the glyphs. We want to know how long we actually want to draw them relative to the magnitude. So I'm going to draw them at half scale. And then the other thing I'm going to do is make it a little bit nicer by replacing the arrow body and making it a cylinder instead of just a regular line. So did those 3 things. Basically, I set the stride. That was under the first tab. Under the glyphs, I did 0.5, and then cylinder. Those are the 2 things I did. Now I could also set the geometry quality to high. Why not? It'll make it look a little bit better. OK, so I set my plot options, and now we got our vector field. So we're looking at our vector field directly. And if you play it, you can see how these vectors kind of ebb and flow. Again, this is kind of a static view. At each time step, you're looking at these glyphs tell you what the vector field looks like. So you're not going to see them move that much. They will move, but they're telling you the instantaneous state of the problem. All right, great. So, but let's go a little bit further. So Joe talked about how you can seed points and vect things through vector fields. So streamlines is the notion there. There's also there's a whole set of operators that are based on integrating particles through fields. Streamlines, pathlines, streaklines. For the purposes of this, I'm going to just talk about streamlines. We may get to pathlines, but what a streamline is you have a vector field and you advect it. On that, it's a static thing. You have a static vector field. You start at one point and you trace your curves through it. What a pathline does is it uses multiple time steps of your simulation. So each one of these simulations has a particular delta time, like 0.1 of a second, right? And if we do a path line, we will advect a little bit, then move to the next time step. Advect a little bit, then move to the next time step. So a path line will actually tell you the trajectory of the flow as it evolves time varying. First, though, so I wanted to kind of give you an idea what those the differences between those two things are. But first, let's go ahead and let's look at a streamline plot. So one of the things you have to do when you're doing streamlines is you have to actually put the seed points somewhere that makes sense. Now, you could put them everywhere, but then again, this is one of these things you get into expensive computation. Now you're vecting all these streamlines all over the place. You usually have a question you want to answer, so you usually have a notion of where you want to seed these. In our case, we want to center them around this inlet here, and we just want to see where things are going as the blood flows into the artery. So I'm going to use a pseudocolor plot actually to help me find where that is. So I'm at a pseudocolor plot over velocity magnitude, just like we did before. And I'm interested in looking at a slice that's near, basically very, very near the entrance here. So I'm going to add a slice operator. And we'll set that to a point that I know happens to be around here. If you use these axes, you could kind of orient yourself, right? But I'm going to look to put a slice right here, which is basically, it's normal to y, but it's around 333. So that's where it happens to be. So in my slice operator options, I have y-axis. I'm going to put it at 333 in space, and then I'm going to uncheck this project to 2D because I want to keep it in 3D so I can see it in its original context. Hit apply, dismiss, and draw. And sure enough, okay, we have this little slice here on the inflow. From here, I want to ask a question about it. I say, well, that's great. Well, we know that in this area here, things are higher, there's a higher speed there. It would be nice to go ahead and set some seed points sort of around that area. So I need to know where that area is. So again, I go to something like a query that allows me to ask questions. So I select the query menu. I make sure my plot here is actually selected, and I do my max query again. This time I'm not going to do it over time. Just want it at one point. And I get a value. So this tells me the max is there, and it's at these three places. Fantastic. So I can use this as a seed point for my data set here. And actually, if I go, you get different values at different times. So I'm going to go back to time 0, but we'll be able to use this as a reference point in our streamline. So that was a whole lot of work, but again, doing streamlines, you have to know where you want to put them. So you're going to do this computation, you want to put them in a smart spot. So let me go ahead and I'm going to add the streamline plot now. Set those options. So streamline acts on a vector field, in this case velocity. If you had magnetic fields, that also makes sense. And the thing about the streamline plot is it has a whole lot of options. So it's a little intimidating. And we're always kind of battling to keep this window small enough to even fit on people's things. But with great power comes some time to learn these things. So you have to poke around. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my stream location. I'm going to go back to this guy. Let me see here. So I did something. So I did something incorrect. So when I did my query here, when I was caught up in talking about original versus actual or earlier, I actually accidentally did it on the original data. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So I did my query again on my velocity magnitude. This is the point that I really care about here. So let me go ahead and seed that. So I'm going to paste that in here. I'm going to go circle, and this gives you all these options. These are covered in the wiki. We have a few minutes, but I want to show you the picture. So I'm I'm deciding that I want to place a whole bunch of dots around a circle that I'm going to center at this point that I found from either plot. I want it to be nominally a little smaller than unit normal. So all these things, it's hard to pick good defaults for these things. But I want them to go normal to the y, that's how I took my slice. And then you can set the up axis. The up axis kind of tells you the direction. If you get it wrong, you could integrate backwards. So, but here we are. So I got this circle, and this is going to go ahead and tell me where I want to put my points. And now I want to know how many points I have. So I'm going to actually, under sampling here, I'm going to select boundary, and I'm going to say, OK, I want 12 points. Fantastic. Let's just go ahead and what did I do wrong here? Yeah, OK, that's fine. So I set all these things. I'm going to go ahead and click Draw. And you can see now I'm invecting those particles through time. Again, this is a static view of time. So each time step, and VisIt will pop up here telling you, hey, something went wrong with the invection. That's really important to know if you're doing analysis. But sometimes it gets quite annoying, so of course we have a way to turn it off. So under advanced here, there's all these different warnings that tell you, hey, something went wrong. You know, when you have a vector field, you could dead end into something, or you could vect out of the problem. There's a lot of things that could happen. So I'm going to turn those off so we don't get annoyed by them anymore. But if I animate this guy, I'm looking at each time step, but I'm looking at each time step independently. So I'm doing this static analysis where if I put a point at, put all these 12 points here and let them flow through the field as if that was the steady state flow, that's what it would look like. Well, obviously the vector field's changing over time. So, otherwise we would see the same streamlines at every time. Again, this comes down to path lines here. So we can go ahead and compute those. First, let's make it look a little bit better. So under appearance, instead of using lines, I can use ribbons or tubes. Tubes is a good thing to do. And then I can also set heads and use little cones. And then of course, again, our window creeps up on being too big here for me. So, but it's just a different way to make it look a little bit better than the lines. I can also change the color table to something that might be better. It's probably not better on this projector, but go back here. So here's some pictures. So we actually do have time, so this is good. So let's go ahead and let's look at path lines. All right, so under the Advanced tab, this is where you can say, hey, I want streamlines or I want path lines. It's a pretty simple option to turn it on. Of course, this is enabling a very much more computationally expensive operation here because we're going to read all the time steps and vect everything. In this case, our mesh is the same over time, so that's good. That means we don't have to do, when we do gradient operators, we know what things look like over the mesh. So I can set this option here to say mesh is static over time. And before I do this, I want to go ahead and set this to time 0. Because you could start a path line anywhere, but we're kind of interested in what happens throughout the time of the simulation we have access to. So I set the time to 0, and when I hit apply here, we're going to go ahead and, again, it's doing this frantic computation where it's reading all 200 files, advecting them, and working on creating the path lines. At the very end, so here's what happens. So over the course of these dumps, these simulation dumps, the 200 that we have, if you dropped little particles in here and had them flow around this artery, according to the real physics of the vector field, assuming they're massless, they don't affect the flow at all, this is the picture you get. So this is a small data set, so doing path lines isn't a big deal for this, but for other things, you usually want to export these guys after you've calculated them, because they can take a while to calculate. One more nifty thing I'll show you is that once we've calculated them, we can effectively animate them using the Python interface. So I'm going to go back to the commands window, and I have something ready here. You won't be able to see it. Let me show it to you here. So this, again, we're back in the Python interface, and we want to do something here. And in this case, after I calculate the streamlines, I want to just crop them away based on time, so I can get an animation of this, what these paths are. So you can do that with about 10 lines of Python code once you have it set up. Of course, it would take much more to set the plots up in Python, but I already have it set up. So in this case, I'm just going to animate over 100 time steps and crop away. So I'm going to run this, and get this up here. All right, where's my window? It's actually going to calculate it one more time because there's a change in settings, but it'll take a second. After we've calculated it, we'll be able to crop away. Yeah, so here we go. So you can see the flow, you know, it vected as the simulation would vect it after you got here. And that's the end. I do realize I went pretty fast, but I have all the information on the wiki for you, and I'd be happy to go through any of these steps with you on the hands-on. I've got a wealth of other stuff for you to deal with too, so please bug me. The other thing I just want to say is visitusers.org. Go there. There's a lot of Livermore websites. We have mailing lists. They're very active. Don't suffer in silence. If you have a problem with VisIt, email me. I won't get sad. I'll just try to help you. And it's not just me. There's a whole team of people, right? So please ping us. We're happy to help people with build issues. Happy to help people get up and running with the tool, data file format issues, etc. So, all right. Thank you very much.
I'm actually curious, so for this particular simulation, the data was nodal-based or cell-centered? And how do you deal if you have different types of data?
So it depends on the operation.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, yes, I can. So he was saying for this particular data set, it appears things were based on the nodes or the vertices or the points of the mesh, and how do we deal with things that are not? So in this case, usually the velocity vector fields are kinematic things that live on the nodes, and then we usually have other things which are thermodynamic, like density or things like that. So our view of the world really is typically linear interpolation on the nodes and piecewise constant on the inside the cells. That suffices for a lot of different things. Now that said, so we need to be able to handle face data, for example, fluxes on faces and stuff like that. And we're working to do that. And we're also working to bring in higher order finite elements. So I have an example here using a higher order finite element library to refine ourselves down to our linear elements, so we can ask the same type of questions. But is your question specifically like the gradients or the?
Not necessarily, but for example, there are finite volume schemes that take in nodal-based, but also cell-centered.
Yes.
So when you do the nodal-based, you're going to calculate the values of the nodes. You know that. But when you do the cell-centered, you are going to get an average value over the element,
Yes.
which is that. So that actually requires to export the data in a different way. For example, just the mesh, which is actually the nodes, the vertices, but then the data is associated with the cell itself.
Oh yeah. So we have our model handles that. Our model definitely handles that. It doesn't handle face data. So if you had things on the faces, it doesn't handle that. But our data model handles that.
So now in this one with the high order element, what would be the requirement on the data? So just the vertices, and then you do actually a rendering that is high order? Or
So for these, you'd actually have to tell us the basis functions you're using and stuff like that. And then when you move to higher order elements, there's the ROM complex, I guess is what I call it, allows you to define kind of exotic vector fields on things that are other than the elements or the zones. They're based on the curl or the divergence and stuff like that. So these are things we're working